Welcome back to the show. Dana and I are like on a,
We're worked up.
we're just on we are worked up.
Yep.
So Dana, I've got an issue with evidence-based treatment. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use evidence-based treatment.
Yeah.
That's the very opposite. However, should we only use evidence-based treatment? And what if the evidence that is found was done with complete crappy methods? Like,
Well,
I don't even, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you published a paper, but this is beep.
Yeah.
That's really for myself. I just censored myself, so I don't have to go back and do it for myself.
Great. That's awesome.
But I'm just going to say, I'm kind of done with this. I'm kind of done with people saying, yeah, but are you using evidence-based treatment?
There, for our listeners, let's give some definitions. So the reason I was cringing even when Gwen said evidence-based. So in our field, you see all the time evidence-based practice, evidence-based therapy, evidence-based treatment, yada yada yada. Now the idea is in the past, lots of therapies and treatments were done that people just thought were cool. They sort of palliatively. This person seems better off after we did this thing.
Maybe.
Anecdotal might be a good word for it. And then psychology really wasn't a science, right? This is the days of phrenology where they thought, oh, here on your head is your, and that was problematic, right? But then we swung so far the other way, which is we are only going to say that therapies work if we can demonstrate that they work like in a laboratory, or we can do what we call outcome measures. So for example, when we're training psychologists, as I do, or I teach in the clinic, we'll have their patients fill out questionnaires when they start and at the end of every session, which is too much. But how are you feeling today? Did the session help? Are you feeling better? Yada, yada. There are some psychological interventions that are more apt to be immediately measurable. Like you said, so cognitive behavioral therapy is the big one, right? So you can say, I did this thing in session. We worked on this particular cognitive schema, and here was the outcome 5 minutes later. And so insurance tends to, for the longest time, was saying, oh, that's all we'll cover, CBT, because you can see it happening. The problem is the real world, it does not operate that way. If you're getting CBT for a panic attack and you're out in the world, I got news for you. There's no one standing there coaching you through the CBT end of that, and it necessarily doesn't work. So that's point number one. Point number two is there are a lot of very effective therapies that are a little bit more longer term, and the outcome measure is a little oogier, right? Is a little, to use a technical term, a little harder to get an outcome measure on, right? What we do know, and this has been proven time and time again, is it doesn't matter what modality of therapy you use. The therapeutic alliance is the most single biggest indicator of therapeutic change. Surprise! So having a good relationship with your therapist, trusting your therapist, being able to talk through things and feel held and be reparented and all that stuff we know is what works. Insurance doesn't necessarily like that because those tend to be a little bit longer term, right? So insurance gets its mind on, CBT, you can be in and out in 7-8 sessions. If I'm learning to not be phobic of a moth, maybe, but to deal with the complex trauma background, not so much. I'm not even going to be looking the therapist in the eye yet at the end of 8 sessions, right? So this whole idea of evidence-based, and APA has jumped on board with this. What's the evidence-based? I understand the initial mindset of we don't want to be doing therapies that are harming and really don't have any basis in, is there a good outcome in this? But a lot of them take longer to measure. There's these two branches of research in our field. One is what we call quantitative, and the other is what we call qualitative. Quantitative would be like me giving a questionnaire to 100 people, doing the stats on those things that I measure, whatever I tend to use, questions for depression, and I see if depression shifts. Qualitative would be for me going through therapy with someone and then sitting them with them and having a conversation about depression and seeing if the overall feel of that changes. And there's a different process to, coding that and doing the outcome measures on that. They can be both equally have the evidence base, but our field has gone more towards a medical model, which is like you give this vaccine, the antibodies go up. It's not that cut and dried with psychotherapy. Some things are in psychotherapy, but most aren't. And so what ends up happening is we kind of get our hands tied and people expect this evidence base for everything. And most really good therapists will say, yeah, you kind of need to take the whole evidence based thing with a grain of salt because it's a bigger picture than that, right? We don't want to just be doing, if you're afraid of heights, I'm going to dangle you from a 50-store window on a bungee cord. Probably not a good idea, right? I'm using an extreme example because I'm sure in times past that was a thing, right? Something harmful like that. So that whole evidence-based thing, if you're hearing that and you're seeing that and you're being skeptical of therapy, or you're wondering if your therapy is okay because of it doesn't have any evidence base, or it's hard to find that in the peer-reviewed literature. There's such a club and a siloing in peer-reviewed studies still. I'm seeing better stuff come out in open source journals because there's a little less gatekeeping. And so you're seeing a little bit more, oh, we want to do this other thing that this prestigious snobby journal wouldn't even look at. So yeah, the evidence-based thing really can tie your hands and can really restrict what you can do. And I can't even imagine in your realm when you're going into schools and they're wanting to see results, what must come up when you hear that word evidence-based. It just must make your head explode.
Yeah, and I think there's not an appreciation for the nuance of people.
Yeah.
Like the nuance of people's psychology, right?
Yeah.
So, and what's hard about this is when we limit sessions to a certain amount of sessions, what we are saying is you have a problem that is fixable in 12 sessions, or you have a problem that is fixable and blah, 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 which really I think sets therapy off on the wrong foot to begin with. Like, and so that to me, and I will tell you, I don't mean to be discouraging to anyone listening. I have never had a client for 3 months where we're like, you came in, you had this thing. I know you've had complex trauma for 25 years of your life. And 12 sessions later, this fairy noise happens and you're gone. Like, what in the...
I think I had one, and it was someone who was in a car accident and had the trauma from the actual car accident. I think we got through in 3 months. But this was also someone who came in with no other issues predating that, like had a functional upbringing, and I
get it, and I get it. Like, I mean, like that makes it's a very specific event,
right?
And I think the other thing that evidence-based, there's other problems with evidence-based research. One, the educational journal publication piece is highly bureaucratic and influenced by money. And there's lots of pieces to that. So, that's interesting. And, Dana, you diplomatically called it gatekeeping. But there's a lot of reasons why things don't get published. Yeah. The other is that it doesn't always apply in my mind to the specific population of people and group of people that I support, which are neurodivergents.
Yeah.
While CBT might be the gold, quote unquote, gold standard, let's say, for X, Y, and Z, I will tell you that just talking about something can be so dysregulating for my clients that combating or challenging an irrational thought, again, my air quotes are up, that in itself is not productive.
Right.
Right?
There's more to it than that. It's more complex than that, right? Yeah. I'm thinking of doing assessment. How many of our listeners have done an online, or a multitude, I should say, of online assessments for autism or ADHD? And as you're reading the questions, you're saying to yourself, well, it depends. What are they asking here? What word are they using? And that's the other problem with, quote, evidence-based. If I'm doing a depression measure and I'm using the Beck, there's something called the Beck Depression Inventory. Those questions that are on that particular inventory are worded in such a way that for that test and that test's definition of depression, we can't say it measures depression. It measures what that test purports to measure in terms of depressive symptoms. It's very specific. So that is evidence-based for that test. Same things with cognitive or intelligence tests, right? The intelligence test has such dark roots in eugenics and so many ways that it was used wrong. And still, I remember my wife telling me, I was telling her a little bit about how some questions on the WAST work. And she worked in a town of like 200 people in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And I said, oh, there's a question on there. There used to be a question on there about the subway. And she's like, how would my kids in the middle of Bumble, Montana, know what a subway is? They wouldn't have known what it is. The only thing, they would have thought it was like the sandwich shop. And even then, it's the sandwich shop in Missoula, because we don't have we don't know what a subway is. Versus a kid in New York City isn't going to know a reference to a moose in your backyard, because they're not going to, right? So there's so many, when you talked about gatekeeping, there's so many cultural pieces of it.
Yeah.
There's language pieces to what you're reading or being asked. And so that the evidence base, the more quantitative you're getting and the more limited you're getting, the more you're putting one flavor in there that works for those one flavor people. But if you're neurodivergent, it doesn't, right? So and that's why when I do autism assessment, I use a bunch of measures. I use more than one. Take them with a grain of salt. My tongue's in my cheek for those that are just listening and not seeing. And for me, the clinical interview is way more important than any of those tests. But I use the test because, you're supposed to have those in there.
You have to. We have to.
You should. And you should have multiple data sources. So that idea of evidence-based, it's just, it's not that it's different than medicine. It's that there's more factors at play, right? Humans are more complicated than, geez, if you have a broken hand, I'm going to pin your bone, and we know in 99.9% of people, the bone will grow back together. And then if you're, we can leave the pin in, because in 99.999% of the people, it doesn't cause a problem, unless you're me, and then you have to have the pin out because my body's allergic to it. It was trying to get rid of it and push it out. And my doctor's like, this hardly ever happens. And I'm like, yeah, that's me.
You're like, let's take the outlier and let's just say that's me.
That's what neurodivergence is like across the board. You're just not going to fit into any of these, right? So it's always the outlier. And so you have to throw evidence base out the window in that regard.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a balance of it. But I mean, what I hate is that I'm being held to that only.
Oh, yes,
and it's like,
exactly.
listen, you are right. Like you are, anything outside of this box is not effective, and you're a quack.
Yeah.
Right? That's what that is.
Yeah.
And it's like, have you spent any decent time just talking to someone?
Yeah.
Because if you really tried to get a sense of who this person is, you would very quickly see that you have to throw every single treatment, evidence-based treatment that is based in language out the window.
Oh, yeah, right?
So now go.
Yeah.
Now you go.
Yeah.
Now you tell me what to do. Like, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Or
exactly.
like, how about this for CBT? Listen, you guys, I'm not even saying that CBT doesn't work, because in many ways there are parts of CBT that are very lovely.
Yeah, I use some CBT stuff.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do too.
Sure.
So I'm not throwing the baby out, right?
Right.
Okay. But let's just think about this, because we just kind of know that executive functioning challenges are very common with
Yeah.
neurodivergence, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in CBT, the theoretical framework, again, reductionistic, is thoughts drive behaviors that drive action. So
Yeah.
if you change the thought, the behavior changes and so do your actions, or your behavior's
Mhm.
actions. Okay, maybe
Mhm.
those are the same thing. Let's just say.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many of you that are neurodivergent go, I know exactly what I need to do, but I can't do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
just need to change how I'm thinking about this, and then it'll be fine. No.
yeah,
No. The things yeah.
hence why your t-shirts that say just decide to be happy really piss me off.
Oh, and it isn't you can't just yeah, exactly. Oh, just decide to be happy.
Just
It's
decide
such
to
a
be happy.
privileged thing to say.
I know.
Oh, just manifest your own destiny. I've had so many fights with my dad about privilege and oh, he says, "Oh, uh, uh, African American kids in the inner city have the same opportunities as you did, who grew up in white bread suburbia and had one of the highest rated education districts in the entire United States." Oh yeah, we had the same education. You're right. No, we didn't. Not even close. Did I have to worry every day I left my house to get on the bus that I might not make it home alive that day? No. Did I have to worry about it? Didn't have anything to eat? No. Did I have right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
all these things that you have to.
Yeah.
It takes no onus of context, and in this case, neurodivergence is the context. So everything's a little bit
Yes.
different. So I tell my students, and you and I have talked about this. When you study to the level that we have, you become the instrument. So you can sort of move and pivot with that person and you can meet them where they're at, right? People have told me that having a neurodivergent therapist is so great because you think like I do or like you do. You've worked with that so much and you tend to think neurodivergenty in that
I do.
language.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
fluent. Um, and people will be seen and you get them, right? Versus someone who would say, well, you keep picking your out, just think that that's not good to do and you'll stop doing it. Yeah, you're not so much. It's not going to work. No.
Yeah. I mean, and when I say I speak neurodivergent, I mean, I try. I
Yeah, no,
really try.
you do
But
pretty well. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, and I've always seen this with each of my clients is that I have to
Mhm.
develop a Rosetta Stone for each of them because there's a
Yes.
code. Like
Oh yeah, for
everyone
each
has their own
client.
code,
Yeah.
Oh, we're
Yeah.
talking about junior high again. Uh-oh, you're threatened.
Mhm. Yeah.
Something threatened you.
Yeah.
I know what that code is, or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah.
But this idea, and I love this idea of the context of neurodivergence. The
Mhm.
context is critical when,
Yeah.
especially when we're making these judgments about people's wellness.
Yeah.
Like I, and yeah, on some level, I'm sure we've got the power of positive thinking or the whatever the positive the what is it called, Dana? To- toxic positivity.
Oh,
To-
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Do you really think that
what
if I could manifest my life to be better just by thinking positive, I wouldn't have
I
bloody done it already?
It would have been done.
It would have been done. That's right.
Like,
Oh my
F
god.
you.
Yeah,
Like, what?
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, sorry, don't okay.
I
Wow.
have a yeah, another example. So like talking about the test thing and like the language and the context. So I'll write multiple choice questions for my students for my classes. And then we go over the test together and I tell them, "Hey, if it's a poorly written question, I'll own that. I'm
Mhm.
willing to throw it out. But if you can demonstrate to me that you're in the cracks of the question, and as you're asking me saying, I thought it was C because of this, and
Yep.
it really does, I'm like, you're absolutely right. I'm willing to give you credit for that because you're telling me the competence is there, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm just, if you haven't marked B and the right answer is B, you get the question wrong. That is sort of like evidence based, right? Whereas
Yeah.
I'm saying, well, wait, I really want to know what's in there. And I'll have colleagues of mine that'll say, no, they're just being a know-it-all in class. I'm like, really? No, they're learning. They're telling and they're showing you that they get it. They're beyond
Yep.
the level of what your question assessed because they're asking all these other drop-down menu things. And your
Yep.
question only went to the first drop down, and you need to give them credit for that. So they can write like a short essay and say, "This is why I think this question was right." And I'm like, "You're right. Let's give you credit." So that is sort of like that moving target of neurodivergence that isn't a cut and dried evidence based like kind of hard science is. If you put water at 0 degrees Celsius, it will freeze. Right? And this crazy 32-degree idiocy that we have down here in the United States.
Don't get me started. I
Which
grew
is
up in
totally
Canada,
arbitrary,
so
right? And why is that? Because molecules in water the energy of movement can't overcome the temperature. Psychology is not like that, right?
Yep.
There's bits of those pieces throughout it, but it's that larger idea. And that's what we go to school for, as long as we go to school, that we do, is so we can learn all those things and then be like the catcher in baseball who can still get the wild pitch because we're ready for it, versus someone who's like, oh, it's only got to come down the middle. And if it goes wild, forget it. I'm not even going to look at it. And we're like, ooh, what's that? So we can do that, right? That's more of what humans are like. Yeah.
Yeah. And that in so many ways, when the resources are being used to pay for a therapist or a psychologist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're really paying for their critical thinking. Like, I really feel like, and then that's the piece, like whenever you get an assessment or you go for support and treatment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this is why there is no other relationship like a therapist client relationship.
Mm-hmm.
No other relationship exists on the planet like that one.
That's true.
Because it's very, very, it is very specific. And you're right, Dana. It's like, as a psychologist, we're kind of the vehicle of and they're relying on our critical decision making in many ways. And that only comes from, I think, experience. And that only
we're
comes
the
from
laboratory.
Yes, being curious. And there's another phrase in psychology, especially in testing, we call this testing the limits. And it's when there's a timed nature, let's say, on a test. Usually we see this in academic and cognitive testing. And we get this hunch that, boy, if this person had more time, they probably would get it. And so we take 2 scores, right? We take the score at the time and we take the score beyond the time plus how much time. And that's when we start seeing the true, that's the good stuff, right? It's like, no. With timed limits, we suppress this person's real true ability. But when we give them time, and this becomes then irrefutable when you need extended time for accommodations.
And that's
that's
the outlier you mentioned. You're testing the outlier and saying this person does so much better when they're given that other time.
So it's like, fine. Okay. It's like, fine. We can start with evidence-based if you want me to start with that as ground zero. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be so many degrees off of this, right? Even though it's not quote unquote evidence-based. So again, what do Dana and I are some of this is, it depends.
God, I wish I had $1 for every time I said it depends.
It's too bad we haven't trademarked that.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah. I'm pretty sure the adult diaper company has a patent already on.
Oh, the depends?
It depends. Sorry. Totally loosely associating to me.
By the way, that is like classic ADHD.
That's gold for them. You should, hey, if you work for the Depends people, I'm here all week. I can come up with more.
Which, by the way, isn't that the difference between a verb and a noun?
Yeah. Oh, it depends.
Right?
Yeah, right.
It depends and depends.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You're... On that
note, it's such a great example because it's like, depends. You think, oh my God, adult diapers are horrible. No. Sometimes people just get incontinence for fairly benign reasons. And it's so great that they have access to that. That's so awesome, right? Right there is sort of the shift from the immediate, what the culture thinks, and like, no, it's okay. And that's a lot of what therapists do, right? Client comes to me and says, I can't do this thing. And I say, it's okay. Let's get close to it or not get close to it or mourn the loss of that, because you'll never be Michael Phelps in the pool. But what can you do? It's sort of like going into the tail of that outlier. Yeah. We're normalizing outline. Yeah. Neurodivergence is all about
normalizing the outlier.
Yeah.
There's got to be some place to do that. The big bad world out there isn't necessarily the place to do that. But
That's right. Exactly.
That's really where therapy can be very powerful.
That's right.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, on that note, I don't even remember what we started talking about, but it does depend. No, it depends.
That's our spiel on evidence base. It depends.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think about it. All right. Anyway, everyone, see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everybody.